as we move closer and closer to March 21, the GCOM chairman, Mr. Patterson, would have issued a letter to President Granger indicating that the soonest that GCOM can be ready for elections is late November 2019, and this is to facilitate the house-to-house registration that the PNC, APNU+AFC have been pushing for. First of all, I'll invite you to respond to this. What is the party's position on this?
Well, I think first of all, to our viewers, we're on the countdown. As the British High Commissioner said, there's nothing to stop the clock from ticking. And that is exactly what the Chief Justice, Roxanne George Wilson, has said. The clock is ticking. There's nothing to stop the time, as she didn't grant a stay, nor has the Court of Appeal, as of yet, done so. So 56 hours left before March the 21st midnight, when the Guyana government and the President will be unconstitutional and unlawful. In fact, what we have taking place and what we're on the verge of taking place, unless some miracle happens and the government wakes up and realizes they need to obey the Constitution, is that we have a coup. A coup in which the government is overthrowing the Constitution. Usually when you hear about coups, you hear about military coups, military stepping in. This is not what has happened here. This is where the government itself has overthrown the Constitution. And so today is just one more act in this conspiracy to overthrow the Constitution. One more act in the case of GCOM. But we have to understand the government has been doing everything possible to delay the holding of the elections, and if their desire is to fulfill their 5 years term of office. And so when you see the GCOM's letter today, when he's saying, well, they can't be finished before November, and also says within that November you will have house-to-house registration, so they're going with house-to-house registration, and then they want $3.5 billion more. They want more money. So $5.3 billion was allocated in December 14th by the House, approved, assented to by President Granger before the end of 2018, and $5.3 billion. Now they're saying they want $3.5 billion more resources in order to have both the House-to-House and the elections, and of course they're talking about sometime in November. And so this is again part of the whole conspiracy. On the way coming here in the car, Roman, I was listening to excerpts from Mr. Granger's speech on Friday. Apparently it's all over the place. They're trying to push it, so the public hears it, and Mr. Granger is very reasonable, etc., etc. And it's all a bloody hoax. That's what it is. Because if you listen to the speech and you forget all about the fact that there's a no confidence motion that was passed on December 21st, and that the constitutional Article 106 and 107 were triggered into motion by the no confidence motion being successful in the National Assembly, that the President has to do certain things. One, the first thing is that the President and the Cabinet were resigned on the night of December 21st, and this comes no less from the mouth of the Chief Justice. That's her ruling. The second thing is that the motion was valid. The legislature on 2 occasions says it's valid. The Chief Justice says it's valid. And then, of course, the other part of the Constitution says elections are supposed to be held within 3 months. We calculated December 1920. Okay, we give them an extra day, December 21st. But it also says, well, if it can be extended, but not by Mr. Granger, not by GCOM, but by the elected majority, 2/3 majority of the elected members of the National Assembly. That's the only way it can be done. And it's on that basis that Mr. Granger remains as president. That's the basis. So this thing in his letter says, don't worry, I'll still be the president. Yeah. He is president, is squatting. I'm calling him a squatter. He's squatting in the position of the presidency because he has no constitutional cloak anymore. All his immunities as of December 21st midnight are gone. So are the ministers and so on. Of course, he has assured himself, I guess Mr. Williams has been his key advisor, which is unfortunate, that he was taking the advice of Mr. Williams as his chief advisor in legal matters. I'm sorry for the president. However, so that this is a context. Mr. Granger says we are respecting the legislature. Can that be true? When there's a vote that says majority,
Exactly.
you're not the government anymore. You've lost it. But we're saying, yes, we respect the legislature. These are just words that mean nothing. It says, yes, we respect the judiciary. But the Chief Justice in the High Court ruled. They insisted that they're going to appeal, and they've insisted if they lose at the Court of Appeal, they're going to the Caribbean Court of Justice. How can that be respect for the judiciary of our country? In addition to that, the Chief Justice said the motion was valid. So they don't agree with that, they've gone to the courts. They said the 33 majority was valid, they've gone to the court. They talked about that at the point, her ruling is very specific when she says, on the night of December 21st, when the government was defeated by the no confidence motion, the president and the cabinet were resigned. She even goes on to say they don't have to physically resign.
Yes.
They were resigned automatically. And that the main reason for staying in is either to bring elections within 3 months and or to have an extension to allow extension of time for the elections with the 2/3 majority of the House. And in the interim, it must be very careful on how it deals with strictly dealing with government services and stuff like that. Mr. Granger's speech on Friday says, no, it's just business as usual. We can do what we want. We can pay what we want. We can award contracts. We can make agreements that would be binding on the next government. They can do anything they want. And of course, so these are and of course the last cog in the conspiracy is the GCOM. So he chose a chairman outside of the constitutional provisions, which no one trusts. And now the chairman is singing for his supper. He was put there for a reason.
Yes.
And so now he's singing for his supper. This is a gentleman who I'm sure should be at home having a relaxing time and maybe writing his memoirs. But he's a highly paid official now who is now singing for his supper. He was put there in usurping all the names, usurping the Constitution, usurping 18 eminent qualified people to be the chairman, and now he's doing as he's required, and that is, we're not ready to have elections. We're not ready to have elections. First, they do nothing from December 21st to January 22nd. Nothing happens. Then from January 22nd to February 19th, nothing happens, and they write Mr. Granger's letter saying, we can't be ready. Then they write, Mr. Granger then calls them in and writes another letter to them, telling them, hurry up, supposedly. And now they've hurried up, November. This is taking us from December 21st to November. That's 11 months. 11 months. And so this is the conspiracy that's taking place. And the government has nothing to stand on. So this whole thing, Mr. Granger says, oh, don't worry. We're going to bring credible elections. We're going to have credible elections. The April 30th list, there was no problem with it. We use it in November elections. Clearly all they want is they must have house to house, and they must have elections as far as possible. And so we'll see. This November deadline will start shifting. I'm sure of it, because we cannot conclude a house to house registration within less than 8 months in this country. So even if they were to start, they've started advertising for the enumerators and so forth. And the deadline was March the 15th. So they're supposed to be selecting people outside of a GCOM decision. That's the other violation. GCOM makes decisions, not the chairman, not the law and field by themselves. The chairman. And these decisions are not GCOM decisions. So we're in a serious situation.
And we've been at pains to point out as well that just about 3 days after that no confidence motion in December, the GCOM spokesperson is quoted in the Ghana Chronicle, the state newspaper, saying that they were moving ahead, they were ready for elections within a 3-month period.
Yes.
And now we have all these excuses popping up.
Well, you know, they were given instructions. Congress Place, as usual. Congress Place is in charge. And so this whole thing about these statements by the president, oh, we mustn't interfere with GCOM, you know, it's constitutional body. It's a joke. It's not true. We know the 3 commissioners get instruction from Congress Place. We know that 2 of the 3 commissioners are employed by the government. They're compromised. They're employees of the government being rather well paid. And we have a chairman who has the trust only of one person, and that's Mr. Granger. No one else in this country trusts him. And therefore, this is a situation, this is a recipe that's being created to allow the government to play around with our rights. And so when people say constitutional crisis, you know, it's not just about Granger being in the office. He's squatting. I'm saying he's usurping the Constitution. He's squatting in the office. The ministers are squatting in the office. But more than that, what does it mean to the rest of the country? What will happen? It means that the government really has no authority to make agreements, no has agreement to go and spend more money, that the issue of their salaries is highly questionable. Do they get paid or not? That is something that maybe the courts will have to rule on. The issue of public servant salaries will be paid because it is not the minister who signs off on the payroll. Yes. It is the finance secretary and the accountant general. And $300 billion was approved in the December 2018 when we debated the 2019 budget. So I don't want people to be scared who are public servants that, you know, they won't be paid. They ought to be paid, they should be paid, unless this government decides to, as usual, deflect blame from themselves and say it's the PPP causes by bringing the no confidence motion in. But the problem is that the government lost its mandate at the local government of 2018. And therefore it then lost the mandate of the elected officials of the parliament. Any democratic government or government desiring to be with any pretense of democracy would have gone and called elections within 3 months. It could be done. And you know, this thing, Rommel, they talk about, oh, we needed 148 days. Well, I haven't had time to calculate between today's announcement and November how many more days that is. You know, because they were saying 148 days would take us to July. So I don't know now when we're counting. But we're talking from December 21st to November. We're talking about 11 months. No? 11 months, is that right? So almost a year. And so this government has no desire to comply with the Constitution. And I think for the investors, for business people, people who are wanting to come to Guyana, they're going to say, let's back off. For business people who are planning to expand their business or try something new, they're going to tend to wait until things are clearer. And so it's going to have an impact on the economy, on the cost of living. So this is not just an academic exercise being taken place in the courts to do with the judiciary. This is where people's bread and butter issues are going to be impacted on, and where our human rights are going to be impacted on. What the government has essentially done by overturning the Constitution, Rommel, has removed our right to choose. They removed our right to vote. That is what they've done. They've removed that right. Now, once they remove that right, then they can start talking about other rights. When the president talks about sedition in his speech, and what was his last words? I urge everyone not to be intimidated by incendiary insinuations aimed at instigating disaffection. Who's been doing that? Who talked about war if there wasn't any house-to-house registration? Who said that? Us? You? No. It was, you know who, the People's National Congress, right at Congress Place. And they were so proud of themselves, they videoed it and they put it all over Facebook so you could all know that there was going to be war. Then you have, what did Jagdeo say at Babu John? Chase him out. If you're coming into our communities and you're not legitimate, then we have a right to tell you, go away. We don't want you here. Go away. And so, why is the government afraid of that? When in 2014 they brought a motion that had not even been put on the order paper for debate. So it was never debated. Yet Mr. Granger went on television and said that only caretaker responsibilities the government could do. This is when Mr. Ramatar prorogued the parliament. Mr. Granger went and said that we couldn't sign anything, no contracts, no agreement with other countries, only caretaker responsibilities. When he was reminded about that statement in front of him by Mr. Jagdeo at the first meeting with Mr. Granger on January the 9th, Mr. Granger said, I don't know anything about that. I don't know of any limitations on the government's responsibilities once there's a no confidence motion. Then let's go back to 2014. It is the same Mr. Granger who calls on countries sanctions.
Exactly.
Sanctions against the PPC government. While there's prorogation going on, sanctions. What does he say in his statement when he meets the US ambassador? He says, no interference. No interference. But in 2014, he's been hollering high, heavy, and going to Washington, flying off to Washington and to England and to different places to tell them, don't have any dealings with the PPC government. So this is two-faced. This is hypocrisy of the highest level. And so we cannot accept that Mr. Granger's speeches, particularly that of March the 15th, is done with any genuineness at all. It is about power, staying in power, and saying to the Constitution, we don't need you. And that's why I'm saying this is a coup that has just overthrown the Constitution to allow them to stay in government, and therefore in other countries, this would be called the beginning of a dictatorship. That's what you'd be called when a government does not have the mandate of the people. How do you get the mandate of the people? By voting. The people vote you in. Or you bring a confidence motion in the parliament and everyone says, yes, we love you to death. You have the confidence of your electorate in the parliament, you know. But when you throw the Constitution out, throw it to the wind, then you have no constitutional cover. And therefore, the country is moving in the direction of a dictatorship. You have no ground to stand on that makes you a president and a government anymore.
Okay, so just a reminder, the telephone numbers are on the screen, 233-2459 and 501-0617. We have a few minutes more that we could try to entertain as much calls as possible to get your feedback as we move closer and closer to March 21st. And as we wait for your call, it is interesting to note, Mr. Shearer, that while the government is saying one thing, that they do not recognize this deadline of March 21st, it was the very government, via their Attorney General, that approached the appeals court to put a stay on that March 21st deadline. So again, they have recognized it, but conveniently, when they speak to the media, it's a different story. I think we have our first caller. Caller, good evening.
Hi, good night.
Hi, good evening, Mr. Romel and Madam Gill.
Hi.
I would like to let the public know, in 2 months' time, India will be heading to a general elections, right?
Yes.
And they who have the record for the largest democracy in the world. We have 900 million and over will be heading to the polls, and they need 30 days to prepare. So I don't know, Granger talking to when he's saying he fingerpicked Mr. Patterson, if Mr. Fit and Proper, right? And he's talking about unilaterally, independently, an autonomous body and all these kind of things. I don't know who will sit down and listen to these fellas. But what I think pressure should be applied, because we cannot sit down and preach to them and lecture them, because we know what the APNU is actually the PNC from in the 80s, right? And they call them for war. We cannot sit down and take this bullyism. So we have to use force as well. And we could start with peaceful protests. If we have to shut down the country, let it be. We have to struggle. Some people might starve. We might lose blood, sweat. We might die. But it's going to save us in the long run, and it will bring about the desired result. Rather than to ignore the Constitution and this path we heading down here, we don't want to end up and become like Venezuela. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl.
Thank you. Well, we don't know how long the struggle will be, whether the government will have to capitulate and agree. We had offered an election date by April the 30th. It was ignored by Mr. Granger. But we are a party that has used peaceful protests,
Yes.
used the laws and the Constitution, as we did in 2014. We have done nothing unconstitutional, and we don't do things if it is that when we've been arrested doing picketing, like under the Burnham Times, we were just picketing with the badge peaceful picket on, and it was just used politically. So we have to be prepared for struggle. We have to be prepared to make our voices heard. The silence is going to be one of the greatest enemy of all of us, and silence will keep the government feeling they can do whatever they want. But I think that everything has to take its own course, and we believe in peaceful protest and be able to use the laws of our country and the Constitution to defend ourselves.
Quite right. Caller, good evening.
Hi, good evening.
Hi, good evening.
I want to say something. When PPP, when in office, when they never get a vote counters yet to know that they didn't win, they take broom and start sweep the place like they're crazy to get out PPP. That PPP got to do now to get them out. Do something to get them out from there. We don't want them anymore because we're going to suffer. You see what I'm speaking here about today? I can let the nation know. Sake of PNC, make I don't have education because of that. Born I'm going to send the young girl children to your school. So that one I get let them want that for happen back again, but nowhere. PPP on the top with Jack Dale. Jack Dale is the president, and he always got to be as a president. We don't want no rain, just a drag of it to drain, for clean drain and clean whatever. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think people, they're combinations of responses. There are people who are hurt and carry hurt with them for many years, going back a long time, because when one thinks that one government changes after another, that the Burnham areas and the Hoyt areas were very difficult for a large percentage of the people. In fact, by Hoyt's time, 61% of the population was below the poverty line. And so there are a lot of people who carry tremendous hurt and emotions. You also have those who believed in the APNU+AFC. Swallowed hook, line, and sinker, all the promises, and particularly the young people did, and gave their vote for the APNU+AFC, and they feel betrayed now. In fact, the young people became the endangered species under the APNU+AFC, just endangered species, because it's hard to find them anywhere. And it seemed to be a time when the gentlemen of the old days, who are now in the 80s, felt that by the PPP being in government for 20-odd years, that they had to get back, they had to gain back lost time, because the PPP had robbed them of 20-odd years of the fine living that they had expected that they would have enjoyed. So it's unfortunate, because the majority of people who voted for APNU today, and worse yet for AFC is almost dead as a party, that they have felt betrayed, and some will not trust another party easily, some will not vote, and some will come out and cross over to the People's Progressive Party. The problem for the APNU as of now is that they have not been able to mobilize people themselves. However, do not underestimate the PNC and the APNU+AFC government. Do not underestimate them in the spirit of what they're capable of. We are being very measured, tempered. We are being very factual. We are calling for the defense of our Constitution, rule of law, democracy. And so they try to use excuses that what Jagdev said is seditious. What Jagdev said is not seditious at all. And in fact, I want to remind some people who may be younger is that there were days when we went to what were APNU-dominated, or what was that called, PNC-dominated communities, where we were pelted and beaten and chased out. And
I remember when you had some bricks and you...
Yeah. I mean, this thing of coming as if they're holier than thou. No. We remember very well the number of public meetings that we had where we were pelted with bricks in both Georgetown and outside of the city, and the looting and the violence and everything else. So, but with this time, we're not going to be intimidated. We're just saying that we're on the right side of history, we're on the right side of the Constitution, and this is a problem for the PNC. Granger can't whitewash all this nice fancy speech justifying the contempt of the judiciary, the contempt of the legislature, the contempt in relation to our Constitution. He can't whitewash this. And he has made, I think, one of the worst decisions of any political leader in our country. And I thought, Granger, a man who likes to think of himself as a historian, he's not, but he thinks of himself as a historian, is that he would be concerned about his legacy.
Exactly.
His legacy, when this is all over, whenever it's over, his legacy will be worse than Burnham's. Burnham played with the Constitution, and Burnham wanted to have power, so he changed the Constitution to give him all the power. He rigged elections, he rigged referendum. He did a lot of wrong things. Mr. Granger is taking a constitution and overthrowing it to keep him in power. Burnham never did that. Burnham made sure that he created a new constitution to allow him to do all the wickedness he did. But Granger is just saying the Constitution doesn't count. And therefore, that's much more dangerous. That's a much more dangerous character you're dealing with. And so the legacy of Mr. Granger will go down in this history as one of the few countries in the world where there was a no confidence motion and where no elections has been held. Months later, you're falling into the group of countries, maybe like Rhodesia, before it became independent, and countries that have had problems with elections and this kind of behavior. We're on midnight December, March 21st, we're dropping out of what is the global embrace, of democratic nations. We're going to be outside of that.
Yes.
And that is going to be Mr. Granger's legacy in Guyana.
Call, good evening.
Hi, good evening.
Yes, go ahead.
I just want some clarification. When
Sure.
in 2014, when the no confidence motion was passed against the PPP, how long after the PPP held election?
Just for clarification for you, I'm glad you sought that. The 2014 no confidence motion was never debated. It was tabled after the Parliament went into recess in August 2014, and in October, the President prorogued Parliament. It was never debated, so therefore it was never debated, it was never passed. And after 2 months of prorogation, the President dissolved Parliament and we went to elections. And the time between the date of dissolution and the date of Parliament was 72 days. So if someone's told you that the no confidence motion was passed in 2014, that's absolutely untrue. This December 21st motion is the very first in the entire history of Guyana, going back to British colonial times and to independence times.
I think it's 8 months after election was held. And I think y'all said down there, people just inciting racial myths. That lady spoke about Burnham and give she education. Burnham had free education from nursery to university. She is doing she own thing, not she get an education. You can't blame people for not getting an education. And you could shut down this country. This country belongs to W. And you people, it belongs to all Guyanese. And all Guyanese and all the bloodshed and all the drug running and everything that happened in W, Arrow. You're not speaking about that?
Yes, we can talk about that. We can talk about all of that. We can talk all about that. You know why we can talk all about that? Because it's freedom of speech. That lady who called in has a right to express her views, as you do, madam. As you have, madam. Our people have a right to express their views. Just because someone expresses a different view of yours doesn't mean you have to accuse them of being racial. You have no idea what the color of that woman's skin that called in. So why is it when someone takes a position that is pro-PPP, a pro-PNC person must call in and call it racial? Why is it always that? Why is it you can't say that you don't agree with the caller's opinion? based on your experience as a Guyanese? Why is it every time that someone opens their mouth in Guyana, they then get accused? If it's a PPP sympathizer or a PPP person who was not even a member of the PPP, a supporter, a person who is leaning in that direction, they're suddenly accused of being racial. Why is that? There's 6 different races in Guyana, and the PPP is the only party that is a national party that represents all the races. And you can see that our congresses. I don't have to give you statistics. The congresses of the PPP show and reflect the diversity of the membership of the PPP. Let's compare that with the photographs at PNC Congress Place. Where is the diversity there? Where is the representation of all the people of our country? And so the 2014 motion was never debated, was never put to the vote, never won. Ramatar did what the Constitution allows him to do. He prorogued. In January, he announced the date of the elections, and prorogation, by the way, the Constitution allows 6 months. 6 months from prorogation to when you can either dissolve or you go for elections. Mr. Jagdeo kept within the Mr. Ramatar kept within the Constitution. He named the date in January, and in February he dissolved Parliament and the RDCs, and in May you had elections, and the APNU+AFC won by the grand total of 4,526. What a massive victory you got. And if we had had a recount in certain communities, you may not have been in government in May 2015. But the same GCOM didn't allow the recount, remember? So I am not going to tolerate this whole thing that once someone calls into a program, it is automatically assumed that what their race is. I can't tell a person's race by their voice. And therefore I can't accuse you of being racial, although you're making racial comments. You have your political views and you have a right to them. But there must be some level of respect, and not always being this big sword that people walk around in this country with. If I don't agree with you, I can't argue with you on facts and opinions. What is the last resort always is the color of your skin. Precisely. The color of my skin. That's the last defense in everything in this country. And it's got to stop. And I believe people in Guyana have woken up this time. And we're not going to be caught by this attack that's always used to hold us separate from each other.
Caller, good evening.
Hi, good evening.
Hi, good evening.
I just want to say, we all of us support the PDP 100%. And we are waiting for the victory of PDP. Because this government is a pack of a base. And they cannot win an election, only Reagan. Only Reagan can win an election. So by fair and free election, they cannot win an election. They have to thief for win election. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. The issue of our elections is clearly one that our people, as of December 21st, I'll always remember Rommel, December 21st, and the next day walking around the city, it was on the eve of Christmas, we'd been in Parliament, I hadn't had a chance to do any Christmas shopping and buy gifts or anything, and I was overwhelmed by the number of people of all ethnic groups who stopped me on the road, in the supermarket, in the market, in a shop, to just grab your hand and say, congratulations, when are the elections going to be? We feel so happy. You gave us a Christmas gift.
Yeah, it was like a relief.
It was, and it was all ethnic groups, people blowing their horn when they're passing you on the street. Something changed in this country. There was a wind of change that people felt there was a way to deal with the problems they were facing. APNU can talk all at once, but the economy is going down. Cost of living is going up. The exchange rate for the US dollar has gone up. Mm-hmm. Sugar, rice, bauxite, gold are all down, which
and this is all before the no confidence
all
motion.
before the no confidence motion. This is not caused by a no confidence motion. Thank you. And so all our exports, which bring in foreign currency, are down. They've gone and dug into the $785 million US dollar foreign exchange reserve, which we left.
Which they claim that we left them.
We left them as an empty coffer. Yet there's $785 million US dollars. They found it's in the foreign reserves, foreign service reserves, And they've used almost 300 million of that with no accountability. One of the things we're making it clear when we get into government, whether it is month's time, 6 months' time, 2020, we're going to get back in government. And what are we going to do? Used tires. All that nonsense about used tires, reverse that. The VAT. And the whole issue of you can't bring in a car that, what was it, 8 years or older,
8 years.
out. The VAT on essential foods and goods and services, which they put on, off. We're talking about restoring the issues of drugs and medical supplies that were non-vatable. Everything, you take things like the fishermen's, the net. All these things the fishermen use, the things the farmers use, they put VAT on. The first month in Parliament will have to be just reversing, changing all these things back. Because that would have a big fillip on the economy. It allow people to free up money, to be able to do things, to spend things. So that what they've done is gone in with the only attitude of development is taxation. So you take the money from the people and you spend it while the other way. 4 years, $1 trillion. And by the end of this year, $1 trillion has been spent in Guyana. Their budgets for the 5 budgets. And what transformative project do we have? The airport still isn't finished, and the workmanship in the Chedijagan airport is very shoddy. If you go to Movie Town, the quality of the workmanship is much better than at Chedijagan Research Center, Chedijagan International Airport. You know, the roads are in bad condition. The drains, everywhere you go, the canals are all silted up. They came in spending billions of dollars to clean the canal. You'd never flood again. Well, they're only being saved by the fact we haven't got a lot of rain for the last 6 months, and I hope that we don't have.
We're in a dry spell.
We don't have, because if we have heavy rain coming soon, we're going to be in trouble. The canals are all silted up everywhere you go. And so what is this? This isn't, December 21st didn't cause these things. These were there before that. What happened on November 12th is the people said, we don't want them anymore. 80 local authorities, we won 60-odd% of those. We got 113,000 votes more than the AFC. That's why I said write off AFC. Done, finish. And we got, 47,000 votes more than the PNC, or APNU, as you call them. So they knew the writing on the wall. And the other thing, just as I think about it, whenever you get into government with one seat, it happened to us in 2011, 2012. We got into government and they had one seat more than us when they combined their 2 parties. So the 2 parties together didn't have more than us, because that's the Constitution. We are the largest block of votes. But when they sat in Parliament and they voted together, they had 1 seat more than us. So we were a minority government. And therefore we always had to be anticipating that they could bring a no confidence motion against us. But this APNU+AFC knows that there was 1 seat. In fact, when the votes together of APNU+AFC in 2012, when you added those 2 votes together, and they're not a coalition, was 30,000 more than us. When we went into 2015 election, APNU+AFC combined only got 4,526 votes more than the PPP. They must have known, they could not be dreaming in some never never land that a no confidence motion would never take place in Guyana. It had to. It was just a matter of when. They could not be living in such a false world. And of course, no confidence motions are a fundamental principle in parliamentary democracies, to hold government account. So government are held account by the people voting for them and putting them in. The people keep them, hold them to account by their support or their picketing or protest or whatever. And the elected officials representing the people of the country can also bring a no confidence motion against the government. It is a fundamental principle of parliamentary democracy. And so it happened here for the very first time.
So unfortunately we're down to program time, but before we close,
Yes.
What is the position now as we move closer to the 21st? Bearing in mind what the chairman has said, obviously you've said this was obviously premeditated.
Of course.
This was staged. So you have mentioned also that the British High Commissioner has already stated and has reminded the government that the clock is ticking. We've had statements from UN officials,
Right.
from several other governments. So what is expected to happen over the coming hours?
Well, I don't see how Mr. Granger can set a date, November, December, February, or whenever, without going back to Parliament. How he will get back to Parliament after March 21st is an unknown quantity. We don't know. How will he go back? And certainly we will not be supporting. We made our position very clear. We're not supporting. We were willing to give him a little time over, but we're not prepared to any extended period. And so the fact that there's no movement in Parliament and no movement to discuss really the opposition, and the fact that GCOM has now given the president the outer area of where he's interested or his party is interested in, we are now clearly on the precipice of a constitutional crisis. The government is doing nothing to stop it taking place, and this is where our nation is at risk. It is the entire nation. This is where the government is putting themselves, their power, to remain above the nation, above the people of our country. And we're going to have to struggle against it. Our position is clear. At midnight, March 21st, this government is on quicksand. There's a coup that has just taken place against the Constitution to have a president and ministers stay in office with no coverage of the Constitution. It therefore means that we will have to make our voices heard, whether it's through picketing, peaceful picketing, if it's through peaceful marches, and that, of course, the support of friendly countries to ourselves, friendly organizations. The PPP is not alone. Many organizations have already spoken, and therefore we are not alone in these concerns about the risk and the dangers our country, our nation, will now face as a result of reckless, unconstitutional, undemocratic, unlawful behavior by Mr. Granger and the government and his government at this time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shearer. And that was the latest update on the constitutionally mandated elections come March 21st. Of course, you can expect more updates from us, from members of the PPPC, as we get closer and closer to midnight, March 21. I'm your host, Roma Rupnarain. On behalf of Mr. Shearer, goodbye.
Thank you very much for having me.